So here's a movie that we have already discussed a little bit because we ran the interview last week, The Testament of Anne Lee.
Yes, the new film from Mona Fastvold, director of that Jim Shepard adaptation, The World to Come, for which I think, did you interview Vanessa Kirby and Catherine Waterston, or was it just Vanessa Kirby? Can you remember?
Good question.
It was... Anyway,
I think it was just
Vanessa Kirby. So Mona Fastvold, also the partner of Brady Corbet, with whom she co-wrote this film, and the pair have previously collaborated on Child of a Leader, Vox Lux, and of course The Brutalist. The star of this new film, Testament of Anne Lee, is Amanda. Now, correct my spelling, my pronunciation. She pronounces it.
Amanda Wright said Fred.
So Seyfried.
It's Seyfried.
Seyfried.
Yes.
Seyfried.
It just, every inch of me thinks that's wrong, except that Amanda wants you to say Amanda Seyfried. So that's what we will say.
Okay, fine. So Amanda Seyfried, who was on last week's show with Mona Fastvold. If you haven't heard that interview, do go back and listen to it because it was a very, very good interview. So the film tells the I have to say, unknown to me, story of Anne Lee, the Mancunian woman who became the leading light of the Shaker movement in the 18th century. So the film basically follows her early revulsion about sex, which she thinks is the source of all sin, the birth and loss of several children, which provides a genuinely traumatic backstory to her own story. Her initiation into the Quakers and then the development of the shaking Quakers, so-called because they seem to sort of convulse during the spiritual ecstasy of their services. And she was talking, Mona Fastvold was talking about almost shaking the spirits out from the body. The movement to America on a crossing which nearly kills them, the attempt to set up a new utopian society, the hostility from those around them who see them as witches and devil worshippers, not least because the Shakers seem to believe that Anne is effectively the second coming of Christ. So the joke that everyone made is, you won't like her when she's Anne Lee, which they didn't. Here is a clip from the trailer.
For those new here who are unaccustomed to a woman preacher, all that our mother has done. Come nearer to me.
Christ's spirit first appeared as a man, but has reappeared to fulfill the promise of the second coming as a woman, our Mother Anne.
I have seen a chosen people waiting for us in America.
We will plant a great big tree with deep and solid roots.
So, I knew nothing of this story before the film. I think, did you know about it before seeing the film?
I did know some of it just because I did a university study of religious radicalism, which came out of the English Civil War, which is 100 years previous, but is clearly spilling into this story.
Yeah. Okay. So, all I knew was, as everybody does, Shaker furniture. Very, 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 very nice kitchenware. So the story is remarkable. What is more remarkable is the decision to tell the story as a musical, and you and I will have to have a discussion about this. I think that doing it as a musical makes sense because the convulsions of the Shaker service are like a form of kind of trancey dancing. I mean, there is a comparison, in fact, between this movie and Sirat, which we'll talk about in a little bit, which is to do with, raves and, sort of trancey rave dancing. You were surprised when the film burst into song and dance. I wasn't, because I knew that it was a musical, because you had contacted me after you saw the film, because you saw it first and said, did you know it was a musical? And I said, no, I didn't. But obviously by the time I went into the film, therefore I did. But I thought it made perfect sense because I thought the whole thing is the way in which the gestures, the dance gestures are put together is based on that kind of physical representation of spiritual rapture, which happens during the Shaker service. I mean, they take their name from the fact that there is this kind of, this shaking, this sort of, like I said, this sort of trancey spasm happening that they then turned into dance. I think the choreography is amazing. And for me, it worked. Now, tell me why the musical element didn't work for you.
Trancy Spasm, by the way, great name for a band.
Yes.
If I was going to set up some kind of ecstatic worship outfit, I assume there are some, Trancy Spasm would be it. Or maybe Trancy Spasm would be the lead singer. Maybe. I think the story is a fascinating one. And as I said, so I had a bit of an introduction to this based on studying stuff that came out of the English Civil War, which was, as Christopher Hill wrote in his book, A World Turned Upside Down. That's what had happened. Yeah. So, and we're in like the tail end of that.
Yeah.
So I do think all these religious radical groups are endlessly fascinating. And I've found that the dancing and singing just got in the way of it. And I've found it increasingly irritating. And I also, because Amanda Seyfried has got such a great voice, and we've heard her sing before, it all sounded too pure to me. It sounded too West End, too Broadway.
Oh.
And I thought, no, it would have been very kind of crazy and strange. And I don't think it ever answered that. I was messaging my brother because he studied the Shakers at university, and he said that he thinks that the dancing was an alternative to sex. Doesn't sound like a great option, really. But anyway, that's
no,
why.
Yes, I think there is something of that. And when I was talking about ecstatic trance, yes, there is an element which is that if you have to have some kind of physical ecstasy, then actually that does make sense. I should say that, on the subject of the singing, so the soundtrack is Daniel Blumberg was using original Shaker hymns as the kind of basis. He also wrote 3 original songs, and he said that it's one of the most experimental, extreme projects I've ever done.
Yes.
And I didn't have the issue that you had about it sounding West Endy, and partly I think that's because. So the choreography is by Celia Rolson Hall, who also worked on Vox Lux. And I was completely swept up in the physical movement of it. And I think the point that your brother made is actually a very good point, which I think is captured by that movement. But it's interesting because from your point of view, you found it just alienated you from the story. And from my point of view, I found that it brought me in. And I suspect that is going to be mirrored by audiences, and we'll tell obviously next week when we get emails about it. But I suspect that people are either going to go with it or not.
Yeah, I think so. I think also, and let's forget just for the moment, the ridiculous 1.5 kilometers reference, which it's the wrong bird, it's the wrong swimming stroke, it's the wrong unit of measurement.
I'm amazed that I didn't notice that when it happened. I'm amazed because that's such a honk.
It is. It's sort of what? Hang on, stop the film. That Amanda Seyfried's character Anne Lee, I think her phrase was, there is madness here.
Yes.
That she had been driven, for want of a better word, she'd been driven mad by the 4 children she had.
The
who
loss
died,
of the children, yes.
Which led presumably to, you can't have sex, whatever, and no children, thank you very much.
Yeah. Because bear in mind, they thought they were in end times. They thought the end was coming.
All of these groups were convinced that it was the end of the world.
Yeah.
But I mentioned this in the interview. If you go around saying you are the second coming of Christ, you make it very easy for the authorities to say, you can cut that out.
Yeah.
We're not having any of that. Thank you very much.
Can we say on the subject of Amanda Seyfried's performance, I thought it was one of the best performances she's done. I like her anyway, but I thought it was one of the best performances.
Yes.
She said in the interview that she struggled with the accent. I thought the accent was pretty good. We await the verdict of Mancunians who can write in and tell us just how convincing it was, because I'm sure that if your ear is completely attuned, there will be things that are wrong. But I actually thought she did a pretty good job, and she convinced me as an actor, as a dancer, as a bereaved mother, and most importantly, as the charismatic leader of a group who think they have got a hotline to God, who think that she is the second coming, who think that the end of the world is nigh, and who are completely entranced by, it's hard to get those charismatic characters right. And I thought she did. I thought her performance was terrific.
And I agree with that. And who knew that there was Puritan porn? You'll have to see the film for details.
But I'd be really interested to know what people think. Because as I said, for me, the dancing and the music, I found completely engulfing. I wish I still had the Scala show because we would have played the whole soundtrack. For you, you found it alienating. And this is a perfect example of all criticism is subjective. Yeah. I'll be really interested to know what listeners think, whether they go with it or whether they find, as you did, that it was alienating.
And it may well be that if I hadn't learnt about them a bit, then I would have, I wanted more of that. I wanted more of how this movement emerged and where it came from, and an explanation of all that, because it just seemed like crazy stuff.
Yeah.
But anyway, so the Testament of Anne Lee is out. Correspondence at KermodeandMayo.com.